Good evening to all of you. Before we start today's session, please feel free to do event check-in. This will give you access to additional resources and information about events that we are running on Reactor, which are around similar topics to today's session. Also, you will be able to access Microsoft Consultant Hiring Form link from today's session. I will share the event check-in link with the event ID in the Q&A section shortly. Also, we have launched our Reactor group on LinkedIn. Please feel free to join the group to get the latest update on session happening on Reactor. I will share the joining link soon. Thank you all once again for joining us today. My name is Rashmita and I'm the event planner for Microsoft Reactor Bengaluru, India. This session will run over the next 60 minutes, including Q&A. The session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our Reactor YouTube channel within 3 to 4 days. I will share the link to our YouTube channel in the chat section soon. Quick word on our code of conduct. We display this at all Microsoft Reactor events that we run, and it's just a reminder to be aware of others. Key thing to take out here is to be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, being kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. Also, please keep your mics muted during the session. I would now like to welcome Arvind and Zaid, our speaker for today's session. Arvind is a consultant at Microsoft. He primarily helps customers with their digital transformation journey. And our next speaker, Zaid, is a senior consultant at Microsoft, and he is having 10 plus years of experience in Azure infrastructure and DevOps. But for now, I will hand over to both of you to begin the session. Over to you.
Thank you, Rashmita. Thank you for the introduction. So let me just start by sharing my screen. I hope it's visible, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So first of all, thanks all for joining this session on a Saturday evening, and good afternoon or good morning or good evening from wherever you're joining. So today's topic is about Azure Arc. So we are going to see how basically you can run your favorite Azure services anywhere with Azure Arc. So that's the agenda for today, right? So let's see, I mean, in terms of what we will be seeing, right? So first thing we'll see is how you can basically use Azure Arc to build hybrid and multi-cloud architectures for your applications, right? We'll understand more about some of the data and app services enabled by Azure Arc, and we'll also see some of the use cases for Azure Arc and some customer scenarios, right? Um, and then we'll also see how developers can use their favorite Azure services like Azure Web App or Azure SQL Managed Instance and run them outside of Azure, right? And then we'll also see at the same time how Azure Arc enables a consistent and reliable developer experience across all these different environments where you get to deploy these services. And in between all of this, we'll also see some make it real scenarios and demos to understand some of the capabilities which Azure Arc provides. So having gone through the agenda, so let's look at actually the real problem statement which made us create this tool called Azure Arc, right?
Communicating with each other, your client and the server.
It is okay. So looking at the problem statement, right? So the customer environments today are kind of evolving, right? So customers often have tens or thousands of applications in their IT environment. So these could be VMs and databases, or many people have started adopting containers now, right? So again, these could be in multiple different programming languages. They could be on .NET, Java, or Go. So developers kind of have a wide variety of ways by which they can develop apps. Again, these applications can run in diverse infrastructure. They could be on data centers, they could be on specific hosting environment, or say several branch offices of a company. And again, they could be on specific OEM hardware or IoT devices, and they can also run on the edge. Again, customers have the flexibility to now also explore multi-cloud scenarios to host their apps, whether it be on the public cloud or in any private cloud environment. So each environment where these apps run and each of these clouds kind of possess its own set of disjointed management tools, right? So you need to basically learn and learn to operate how these tools basically work. For example, if you're having these apps deployed on Azure or AWS, they have different set of management tools to basically manage and govern some of the apps or databases which you have deployed, right? So there comes the real need, right, for having a consistency of how you basically build, deploy, and manage these applications, so that these applications, when they're getting deployed, you also get an option to patch them. Patches get rolled out in a consistent fashion, irrespective of where they run in. At the same time, the developers also have the need to ensure that these apps are scalable in wherever they are deployed, in whichever region they are running in. So this is actually the challenge. So the customer environments are evolving. You are basically having a number of apps and it's getting deployed in multiple regions and multiple environments, and you don't have kind of a single pane view into all of these environments to govern them and manage the deployments in a uniform way. So this is where actually Azure and Azure Arc come in. So Azure Arc kind of enables you to build those cloud native applications that you can run anywhere. So basically, it provides you the ability to bring any Azure service to any infra which you like. So whether it be on-prem or Azure or any other cloud provider, right? So basically with Azure Arc, it acts as a single control plane to all the data and app services which are getting deployed. So it basically simplifies governance and management by delivering a consistent multi-cloud and on-prem management platform. So what happens with Azure Arc is you can project your existing non-Azure on-prem or other cloud resources into something which we have built in Azure called Azure Resource Manager. So with that, you get the ability to manage all this data and app services from a single pane of glass in Azure. So that's actually what Azure Arc is. It acts as that single control plane for managing, governing, and also at the same time deploying apps in a uniform fashion across all these environments, whether it be on-prem, on the edge, or other clouds. So having looked at what Azure Arc is, so now let's talk about some of the primary capabilities enabled by Azure Arc, right? So if you see on this slide, so there are primarily two specific capabilities. So one is the Azure Arc enabled infrastructure, and the other is Azure Arc enabled services, right? So with Azure Arc enable infrastructure, this kind of enables you to connect your resources which live outside of Azure and operate them as if they were native Azure resources, right? So with this, for example, you can connect a SQL server or a Kubernetes cluster which is running outside of Azure and manage them from management services or tools provided by Azure. So that's one of the primary capabilities. And the other suite of capabilities is the Azure Arc enabled services. With this, you have the flexibility to deploy fully managed Azure services on-prem or in other cloud environments. So with this, you kind of get cloud benefits everywhere, such as scalability, faster deployments, and having these apps and services always up to date. So essentially, the Azure Arc enabled services is like having any of your favorite Azure services like Azure SQL Server, Azure SQL MI, Azure PostgreSQL, or any of the Azure PaaS services deployed in your own data center or any other cloud environment which you have. So these are the core capabilities. So Azure Arc enable infrastructure and Azure Arc enable services. So, so one of the core capabilities, like we discussed, was the Azure Arc enable infrastructure, right? So with this, what you get is the ability to onboard any server, right? It could be on Windows, any Linux distros. It could run on AWS, Google Cloud, or any other on-prem environment. So you could onboard them to Azure Arc. Similarly, you can also onboard SQL servers, and you can also onboard Kubernetes clusters. So any CNCF certified Kubernetes distro can be onboarded to Azure Arc. So if these clusters run on, say, hosting environments like Rancher or OpenShift, or if they run on any other cloud provider, they could be onboarded to Azure Arc. So what you get with this is onboarding all of this, you get a single pane glass view of all of this assets which you have in this environment, and you can basically organize, govern, and monitor all of these resources from Azure. So, so having looked at some of the core capabilities of Azure Arc and having understood what are some of the use cases or some of the overview about Azure Arc. Let's now see a demo of how easy it is to onboard, let's say, Kubernetes cluster, which is running on AWS, Amazon Web Services, to Azure Arc, and having it invented in Azure Portal and managing it. So over to Zayed to just demo this.
Sure. Thank you, Arvind. Hope you're able to see the screen and able to hear me. So what we have, we'll continue the journey, whatever Arvind spoke about in terms of managing. So what we have taken a use case or a scenario today is we've taken a true multi-cloud scenario, right? So as we can see here on my screen, I have a EKS cluster, a Kubernetes cluster deployed on Amazon AWS, which is running. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the journey, how easy it is to onboard a, for the matter, as Arvind said, any CNCF, but in this case, we're going to talk about AWS cluster. So I'll go back and connect to my terminal, and you can see I'm able to connect to my terminal, and this is the same Amazon cluster which we spoke about. And these are the different pods which are currently deployed. Now to install or to connect it to Azure Arc, what are the different steps involved, right? So what I'll do is I'll initiate the command to connect to the cluster, and parallelly I'll go ahead and talk about what it takes, right? If you want to do a deployment of a particular AWS cluster or any other cluster for that matter into Azure Arc. So there are certainly 5 prerequisites before we can arrive into that state, right? The first prerequisite is, of course, you need a cluster, right? We need a Kubernetes cluster to be available so that we can onboard it to Azure Arc. So that is my first prerequisite. The second prerequisite which I have is to have a kubeconfig file. From the security perspective, we need to connect to the cluster. As we can see here, I'm connected to my Kubernetes cluster. So that is my second prerequisite. The third prerequisite is, as you can see, I'm using azcli command. So I need to have a azcli installed on my side. And the fourth one is we're using extension called as connected K8s extension. So this needs to be installed before we can go ahead and run this command. And the last one, which we'll see once this output comes over here, we need to have also Helm installed. So for the people who don't know Helm is nothing but it's just a package manager for Kubernetes. It's kind of Kubernetes equivalent of Yum or apt, right? So it deploys charts, which is like a packaged application, and it deploys all the required resources which you have defined in that particular chart. So essentially what happens when you run this command, it goes ahead in the backend, it triggers those Helm charts, and from that Helm chart, it goes to Microsoft Container Registry and pulls down those charts and then starts doing the deployment onto your cluster. When this deployment complete, we should take another 30 seconds for us. What essentially you will see is you will see another type of resource called as Kubernetes Azure Arc onboarded here. Okay. I'll quickly show you another cluster which I onboarded just before this demo. You can see some metadata information about the cluster over here. You can see the infrastructure is AWS. It's an Amazon infrastructure on which we deploy. The distribution is AKS. And it gives you a little bit of information in terms of what was the last connectivity time, what is the Kubernetes version, and if you want to leverage, as Arvind spoke about, right, the out of the box Azure or first kind of a feel of Azure, like you can apply tags and other things. So I have onboarded an Amazon EKS cluster, and I'm able to connect to it, and then I can go ahead and apply policies, monitoring, log analytics, and other things once I have this cluster onboarded. Meanwhile, this operation is going on. I quickly want to show you what are the different pods, right? So if we talk about what actually happens, right? So we spoke about that it actually triggers a deployment and then it actually creates some Helm charts and pulls. So what you will see is it'll actually create a namespace Azure Arc. And once it creates that Azure Arc namespace, it'll deploy certain pods. Okay. And at a high level, if I have to cover, these pods are responsible for all the operational purposes. Right. So for example, if I would talk about one of them like Metrics Agent is responsible to collect all the performance data and pass it back onto Azure so that you can review it into log analytics and other things. Right. And also we have controller manager. So controller manager is nothing but like operators. So if you worked on Kubernetes, you would know about operators, right? So operator is nothing but a method of packaging and deploying application, right? So controller manager is operator of operators, which is responsible for all the interaction between different Azure Arc components. Okay, and then we have flux logs, which we will talk about a little bit in more detail when we go to the next scenario. But this is how the end-to-end the onboarding experience looks like when you onboard a particular cluster. You will be able to see different onboarded onto here, and you will see in the background different pods being created. So I'll pass it on to Erwin back, and once we are back for the next demo, I'll quickly show you once this command is completed and we are able to see the cluster here. And in fact, it just came up. So we can see this cluster is onboarded here. And we can see the distribution is EKS and the infrastructure is AWS. And still it's switching all the metadata information like last connectivity time, Kubernetes, and agent version. So by the time we come for the next demo, hopefully we'll have all this information populated. So we saw how easy it was to have a AWS, Amazon EKS cluster, Kubernetes cluster, connect to Azure Arc and onboard it to my Azure environment. Back to you, Erwin.
Sharing my screen.
Arvind, you are muted. If you're
I
speaking,
think you're speaking in mute, Arvind.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry. So are the slides up? I just had to change my network. Are the slides up?
Yes, we can see the slide.
Sure. Sure. Give me 1 second.
Looks like we can't hear you.
Okay. How about now?
Now we can.
Okay.
No.
Sorry for that delay. Is it fine now?
Yeah, we cannot see the slide yet, Arvind. I mean, we can hear you, but the slides are still not.
I think it should come up.
It's load. Yep, demo onboarding. We are on. Yeah, we can go ahead.
Okay, sure. Thanks. So, thanks, Red, for showing that. So we saw how easy it is to onboard a cluster which is running on Amazon, right? Onboard that to Arc and have that managed from Azure, right? So in the same manner, you can onboard any clusters which are CNCF certified, any Kubernetes cluster which are deployed anywhere, and have that managed from Azure. So let's now look at some typical use cases or customer scenarios for this Kubernetes, right? So here we are looking at a typical customer scenario for at-scale Kubernetes app management. So we are looking at a retailer who has hundreds of stores. They have a number of applications. So these stores are kind of geographically distributed all over the world. So they're looking to move all these applications to containers which are running on Kubernetes cluster. And the primary challenge they have is they're not sure how they can uniformly deploy and configure these applications across all these stores which are in different geographic locations, right? So some of the business requirement which they have is they need to be able to onboard a new store that can run with specific application that this store specifically needs. They also need to apply governance, monitor these clusters, as well as integrate safe deployment and DevOps practices. So this is actually a typical customer scenario, right? Which many customers, of course, these days would have. So they will have a number of Kubernetes clusters running around the world in all their branch offices or in different locations. They need to be able to uniformly deploy apps to this, at the same time govern all of these apps which are deployed in different clusters. So let's look at how actually Azure Arc comes into play in here. So what we can do is we can basically project all these Kubernetes clusters to Azure. So you can onboard them to Arc. So you can organize and view all of these clusters in Azure. At the same time, to configure the applications, you can use something called GitOps, which is a Kubernetes operating model. So in GitOps, the configurations are kind of declared and stored in a Git repo. And then there are specific Arc agents running on these Kubernetes clusters continuously, which monitor this Git repo for updates or changes or new commits which are coming in, right? So once there is a merge to this Git repo, the agent kinds of automatically picks up, pulls down these changes to the cluster. So this in turn kind of enables the safe deployment practices or DevOps practices, which is one of the customer or business requirement which the customer had, right? So these agents kind of ensure that the cluster, the Kubernetes cluster, conforms to the desired state, which is actually maintained in the Git repo. If there is any deviation from that desired state, it will actually result in an automatic rollback. So basically, by leveraging Azure Arc and GitOps practices, the retail store, which has, like we discussed, a number of stores across the globe, will be able to uniformly deploy, configure, and also manage their containerized applications. So having looked at GitOps, so let's just look at how this actually works. Basically, the GitOps flow with respect to Arc-enabled Kubernetes, right? So if you see on the left, there are a number of Kubernetes clusters which are running. Like I said, these could be clusters which are running on Google Cloud, which can be running on EKS on AWS or any other hosting environments like Rancher, say, for example. So if you want to manage all of this using Azure Arc, so once you onboard them, it will be an Arc connected Kubernetes cluster. And if you want to maybe uniformly deploy and manage applications which are deployed onto all of this Kubernetes cluster, you can enable GitOps. So for enabling GitOps, there are specific configurations which have to be enabled on the Kubernetes cluster. So basically, what it does, it enables or installs Flux and Helm operator. So Flux is basically a popular open source tool in the GitOps space, which can be deployed on the Kubernetes cluster to kind of ease the flow of configurations from a Git repo to Kubernetes cluster. So what you have is once this GitHub configurations are enabled, you will have Flux and Helm operator. Helm again is a package manager for Kubernetes. So once these operators are enabled, right, it actually keeps looking at this Git repo for any changes. So this is a Git repo where you have the application source code. So first time when all of this is enabled, what Flux does is it picks up all the source code and makes sure it applies that on the cluster level. So for example, a V1 version of an application is deployed. Let's say developers come up with some new features, right? So they make changes on the repo, they merge it onto the Git repo. So that's when actually Git Flux will kind of look for these changes, new commits which are coming into the repo. It will pick them up and basically do a rolling update on the cluster to again bring it into conformance. So basically, it will deploy a V2 version of the application. So this is how easy it is to kind of leverage GitOps and also Arc-enabled Kubernetes to basically manage deployment of, let's say, an application to several Kubernetes cluster and also manage rolling updates and patching of all these applications which are running. So having looked at the GitOps flow, I'll hand it over to Zaid to show us in real time on how this actually works? What do you say?
Thank you, Arvind. So we can see continuing the journey on the same onboarding cluster, Amazon cluster, which we spoke about. We can see this cluster is onboarded and whatever the information was missing at that time in terms of the connectivity, the Kubernetes version and the agent version, everything is updated. Now taking it forward, the scenario, the retail scenario which we spoke about, I want this to be connected to my same Git repository and the configuration. I want to align to that, right? So again, how easy or how simple it is. It's we are pointing it to a repo. I want it to be compliant to a app Git repo. So I'm giving that value, and then it's just a single AZCLI command which I'm running, which will be responsible for creating a K8s configuration, right? And if we double click on it and see what values it has, there's some Git polling interval, how often we want to poll it. And then there's some information related to the cluster, related to the resource group, which you are pointing to. So how that easy it is to. So if I come back here, GitOps, and click on it now, and I do a refresh, you can see this started getting deployed on this particular cluster. So what I've done is, in interest of time, I have two clusters already. So this is a cluster which I showed you earlier. This cluster, again, an Amazon EKS cluster, which we can see here, configured with GitOps. So if I click on it, click on the GitOps configuration, and whatever you saw on the command line, it has the same configurations, whatever we have asked it for. So we have asked it to have this particular namespace, to be deployed for cluster configuration. What are the operational parameters in terms of how often you want to poll it for, and then what repository URL of Git where you want it to go and fetch the data from. This is my first one, and then I have another cluster which is my AKS cluster on Azure, and this is also configured with my cluster config, right? So it's a retail scenario. We have multiple Kubernetes cluster across the globe, and all the clusters are configured with the same K8s configuration. Now, if I go back to my the shell, so I'm back on my shell. I have my Amazon cluster. Now I want to show you what exactly is this particular application is, right? And before I actually show you that, I actually want to show you what is there in that Git repo which we are talking about, right? So in this Git repo, if you see it's a simple application, I have a simple Hello Arc application which is deployed with two replicas, 2 pods will get deployed, and then I have a cluster IP. So all of this is part of my Git definition or the Git repo, which should be deployed when I do a K8s configuration. Okay. And if I go back to my Amazon cluster, I can see if I get the pods and services running on this, I can see my pods are running for last some time. And then I also have my service running, the cluster IP, which we spoke about, all part of the GitOps configuration. And for the purpose of demo, what I have done is I've also deployed additional Nginx Ingress controller so that I can expose. So Nginx Ingress controller is used to expose my service outside, right? So that I can browse this application, whichever I have deployed here, and show you guys in real time how the application looks like currently and what happens if somebody goes ahead and as a developer, I go ahead and make a change in the Git repository and how quickly or how easy it is to manage the configuration. So this is my EKS cluster, and then I'll quickly show you my other Azure cluster as well. So this is my Azure cluster. This is also deployed with the same Hello Arc application, consistent. And in this case, I'm using a load balancer. So I have an external IP exposed for this load balancer using the Nginx Ingress controller. Okay. And if I'll show you, so this is my, if you would have seen the name there. So this is my Amazon cluster, which is deployed with the application, and my other cluster, Azure cluster, which is also deployed. So both of them are consistent. And if you can see the message, so I'm printing a message just to show you in real time when the change actually happens when you make a commit. So this is what we see here. And when we go back to my repo, this is the message which I'm printing as part of this image. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make a change and see what happens, right? And before I do that, I also want to show you guys in real time the pod part of it, right? What happens when we make a change. So it's a Reactor meetup, which we're doing. Let's make commit to this change. right, and come back here. I put it on auto refresh so that we don't have to wait for the. I don't have to refresh it every time to make sure it works. If you see right and left, you can see how quick it was, my Amazon cluster. And if you paid attention to the pod name as well, the pod changes. And if you'll see, all the pods will get this latest image or the build get deployed. So that's how easy it was for the change to happen and how quick it was in the real time, as you saw. And also, if I have to go back and show you what actually happened in the background, right? We did all this configuration. We can see as you are watching the pods, right, what's happening. What it did was, since there was a change, so the whole concept, which Arvind spoke about, the flux operator and the config agent, which we saw in the cluster, they saw there's a change present. So they went ahead and they actually terminated the application, the Hello Arc pod, in a rolling upgrade fashion. And then they brought up a new Hello Arc pod. That's how the change happened. This was for my EKS cluster. And similarly, we saw it happen for my Azure Arc other cluster as well. So that brings us to the end of our GitOps demo. And before I hand it over back to Arvind, I just wanted to take a minute to talk about my experience, right? So one of the reasons, as we spoke earlier in the call about this whole series of session which we are doing, is about the opportunities, right, which we have currently in Microsoft Cloud and AI team, which I'm part of. So I just wanted to talk about as a consultant, right, as a senior consultant or a consultant, what we do, right? So we are primarily accountable for developing technical solutions, right, that maps to the customer engagement architecture by getting into combining the deep technical knowledge which we have, and also with respect to specific industry. So that is one part of it. And then as a consultant, right, I have multiple responsibilities. I start from going to the client, having discussion on the requirements, planning and designing a solution, and then coming back and developing on it, right? And develop on it, reiterate on it, go by agile method, and then deliver a solution to the customer. So it's not just about coding. It is at different level, and it involves good amount of interaction with multiple stakeholders. So that's how a typical day or a typical time looks like when you are in Microsoft services or the industry solutions cloud and AI team, which I'm part of, which I'm very proud of being associated with for last eight plus years or so. So I'll hand it over to Aditya to share his Microsoft journey and give us some more insights about exciting opportunities in AC and I team. Over to you, Aditya.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Thanks for sharing your experience. Hi, everyone. I'm Aditya. I'm a technical consultant in Microsoft. And yeah, as mentioned earlier by Zaid, we are doing all this series for like talking about few of our opportunities that in Microsoft services. And let me share my experience at Microsoft. So I'm working in Microsoft from last 3 years, and before joining Microsoft, I've worked with 2 tech startups in Hyderabad, and Microsoft was always my dream company. And like any other person who wants to be part of Microsoft, my expectations were like to work with like-minded people and another set of smart folks and work on some latest technologies, and maybe get an opportunity in customer engagements and contributing to and envisioning solutions for the requirements. And of course, goes without saying, being part of an organization with a brand like Microsoft. And these were the expectations that were running back in my mind before joining Microsoft. But once I joined here and spending like 3 years in a consultant role, right, I realized that all my actual experience exceeded my expectations. So I've experienced everything that I've hoped for, and more and beyond that. And working as part of this tech savvy organization, I got to work on like latest tech stack, and I had great learning when collaborating with diverse set of people. When I say diverse, it's not just about the gender; it's about skill set, abilities, culture, and cross-functional teams. Okay, and Microsoft have provided me an environment where I can like go and have some healthy discussions, brainstorm ideas, and deliver features. And above all, our team is the frontliner for the customers to go to for any solution or product innovation they wish Microsoft to take lead in. And one thing, what is that one thing that I feel proud of every day is whatever feedback we receive from the customers, right? So that feedback in turn helps our Microsoft product teams to further innovate and build the next set of features that you all see. and help us achieve our customer-centric goals and priorities. And yes, if you are one of those who are looking for that exciting journey, we are from Microsoft Industry Solutions, Azure Cloud and AI team, and we are looking for technical consultants, as mentioned earlier, in all the three locations, Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Noida. And if you are interested and want to know more about that, you can always feel free to ping any one of us. Or to be very simple, you can just fill the form that is shared in this chat and also part of this meetup description. Our HR team will get in touch with you shortly. Thank you, and I'll hand over it to Aravind. Aravind, you want to share your experience?
Sure, Aditya. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I've also been part of the same team, Azure Cloud and AI, part of Industry Solutions. So I'll just highlight some of the things which you get to do being part of this team, right? Like Aditya or Zaid told. So you get to solve business problems for large enterprises. So you are kind of witness and part of the transformation which some of these enterprises go on, and also being in Microsoft, you get to work on the latest and greatest of all the portfolio of products which Microsoft have, and at the same time collect feedback from customers and help improve the product as such. Work with the product team to actually provide some of the feedback which we get working with customers. And one other important thing, which I think even Aditya touched upon, is the community and the culture which we have in Microsoft, which is truly amazing. And like I said, you also get to work with the product folks to improve the products and also at the same time unblock adoption of some of these services which we have for customers. So yeah, so that's been my experience and some of the highlights which I thought I could share.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Aravind. Let's continue now.
Sure. So till now, what we saw was we saw about Azure Arc, right? So we got an overview. We saw how easy it is to onboard clusters, Kubernetes clusters onto Azure Arc and manage them from Azure. We also saw about the GitOps operations model when you're using Azure Arc enabled clusters, right? So we saw how easy it is to onboard these clusters, but at the same time, how easy it is to deploy apps to these clusters and manage updates to those apps. So now let's look at some of the other services which are enabled by Azure Arc. So with Azure Arc, you also get option to run Azure data services on any infrastructure across on-prem, edge, and other clouds. So currently you have the option to deploy Azure SQL managed instance and Azure database for PostgreSQL by leveraging this functionality. So some of the benefits which you get is first thing, so you will always be current, meaning updates and upgrades are fully automated and the deployment is controlled via policies, right? Second thing is you will kind of bring cloud elasticity on-prem, so you can optimize performance of these data workloads with the ability to dynamically scale up and scale down and also scale out at the same time, not having any application downtimes, right? And one more key benefit which you get is all these services, SQL MI or Azure database for Postgres come in with built-in HADR, and you can still use all the same automation capabilities which you have been using with these tools on Azure. And moreover, by connecting to Azure, you will kind of have a unified management or a single pane of glass view to all of this. So you will be able to see your data services which are running on-prem alongside those services which you have in Azure through a single pane of glass in Azure. So you'll be able to interact with all of this with familiar tools like the Azure Portal or the Azure Data Studio and Azure CLI. Right? So having discussed about some of the data services which are enabled by Azure Arc, let's look at again a customer scenario, right? So in this scenario, we are looking at an energy company whose aim is for an efficient and fully automated operation with AI everywhere. So this energy company has several production sites. They have massive data volumes at the edge, and also they need real-time insights into some of these site operations. So again, looking at some of the business requirements. So the primary requirement is they want to leverage some of their existing OEM hardware where they have Kubernetes clusters deployed. they want to automate at scale for HADR, for other operations like backup, say for example, right? And also they want consistent security and governance for all of these data services which they deploy. So this is the use case which you're looking at, and if we see how they can leverage Azure Arc, so some of the benefits which they get by deploying these data services using Azure Arc is they get the ability to deploy and manage database on their existing hardware which they have. So that was one of the primary requirements. So leveraging their existing hardware, they can deploy these data services on top of it. Like we discussed about before, so SQL MI and PostgreSQL are the two options they have to deploy. And also you have Azure ML services enabled as part of Azure Arc right now. So these are all the services which they get. And like we discussed before, they get a single pane of view for all these services from Azure. They are able to use their existing automation tools to unify management of all these data and AI assets. At the same time, they also get the option of security and governance for all these data assets which they have deployed. So we discussed about Azure Data Services, which is actually enabled by Azure Arc. So one of the other key capability which is in preview right now is Azure Application Services. So with this, you get the option to run your favorite Azure Application Services like App Service, Functions, Logic App, API Management, or Event Grid. Again, these could run on any Kubernetes cluster which are connected through Azure Arc. So they can act as a supported deployment target for any of these Azure application service, right? So this is great if you're actually building and running cloud native applications on Azure PaaS right now and want them to run outside of Azure. So there is no real need of actually re-architecting these apps to run outside of Azure. You just need to leverage Arc to deploy the same services which you have in Azure outside of Azure, run it on other clouds or on-prem. So just briefly discussing about some of the capabilities, right, of Azure Application Services. So you have app service with which you can deploy web apps or mobile apps. And then you have functions, which is an event-driven serverless compute platform. And then you have logic apps, which is again a platform for creating and running automated workloads that integrate your app data services. And also you can integrate data from other systems which you have. And API management is a scalable multi-cloud API management platform for securing, publishing, and also analyzing APIs which you have. And finally, Event Grid allows you to basically easily build applications which leverage event-based architectures. So looking at the developer experience, right? So we looked at all of these services which are enabled by Arc. So at the bottom, you have Azure Arc enable infrastructure. So you can onboard servers, Kubernetes cluster, and then you have some Azure Arc enabled services, right? So you have Azure SQL MI, PostgreSQL, and also Azure ML, which is available now. And the new preview feature is the Azure Arc enable application service. So across all this, the developer experience kinds of remains the same. So you can still use the same set of tools which you are used to develop and deploy these apps and data services. So you can use the same set of tools like VS Code or GitHub, but just the deployment target is going to change. So with Arc, what you get is the ability to at scale uniformly deploy, manage, and govern all these assets, again with a single pane of glass in Azure. So these are kind of the capabilities, but the developer experience, like I discussed, remains the same. You still use the same set of tools to interact and deploy and manage all these tools. So having discussed about this, now I'll hand it over to Zayed to just demo us this new preview feature of having your favorite application services from Azure deployed on other cloud or on-premise. How do you, Zayed?
Sure. Thank you, Arvind. So that brings to our last part of our demo, and hopefully demo gods still stay with me. So before I get started, so I mean, just quickly touching up on the whole journey which we had so far. We onboarded Amazon cluster, and then we did our GitOps part of it, and then we also talked about how we can enable data services. Now, taking it further to complete the picture of running your favorite Azure services, right? We're going to talk about app services here. So how we can create app services on Azure Arc. A quick highlight. This is not a typical scenario which I'm showing here, but in the interest of time and setup, I have put up this demo underlying Arc. I'm using AKS, but app services setup is supported on any other Kubernetes Arc enabled cluster once you have. So what are the key prerequisites which we have to enable this, right? So the first one is creating a connected cluster, right? As we saw in the first demo, the first task is to create a connected cluster. So I have a connected cluster which I've connected and I've onboarded it to Azure Arc. The second or the optional part is log analytics workspace, right? So as a developer or as an operations team, I want to, though I'm deploying app service environment on top of it, or the logic apps or the function apps, but I also want to leverage, right, out of the box monitoring capabilities which we have. So if you want to leverage this, optionally, we can also deploy a log analytics workspace or use an existing log analytics workspace. So that will be my second prerequisite. The third one would be app service extension. So basically, this is where the actual deployment starts on the Arc enabled cluster. So I have so if you remember my last demo, we talked about, we created a GitOps configuration using a AZ CLI command. Similar to that, what we are doing right now is we are creating a K8s extension. So to deploy the app service on top of Kubernetes, we actually create something called as K8s extension. And then we pass on parameters like cluster name, cluster details, what kind of extension we are deploying. So I want to deploy a extension time of Microsoft.web.app service. And then some other information, like if you want to leverage log analytics, as we spoke about, you pass on those information related to log analytics. So if I quickly show you, because this is pre-deploy, like what exactly is there inside that cluster, right? I mean, just to give you a background of things, what's happening. So if you can see, I have a namespace called as app service namespace deployed. And similar to what we saw in the first demo, I had few operations related pods deployment. Similarly, I have it here as well. So I have few deployment which are done, which will be responsible for managing my app service environment, right? And if a few of you who have worked on Kida, right? Kida is a Kubernetes event-based, event-driven autoscaler, right? So we have the option here, if you see, to also enable Kida. So if you want to enable Kida while deploying, you can do that as well. And once you do that, you will have the respective pod deployed in your environment. So that is the third prerequisite. And the fourth one is, which a little bit Arvind touched based upon, is the custom location, right? So I want to, once I have created this setup, right? So I created an Azure Arc, I got Kubernetes on top of it, and then I have created app service. But how do I tell logic app or function app that don't deploy natively on Azure, deploy on my particular Arc enabled cluster, right? So that is where you will have this custom location. So if I run this command AZ CLI to show, so I can see that I have a reactor meetup location called custom location, which I'll be utilizing in all my subsequent commands to deploy my cluster. Okay, and then the last piece, which is actually a resource. So whatever we did so far, we did it on the Arc enabled cluster. Once we have done that, we created a custom location. Once we have done the custom location, we are creating an app service Kubernetes environment. This is to bind all of the things like common things like DNS suffix, which will be used across the apps, right? So that is where we deploy our app service Kubernetes environment as the last step. Okay, before I do the quick demo, I also want to show you from the portal, right? How does it look like? So this is my cluster. As you can see, it's a Kubernetes Azure Arc enabled cluster. And as we spoke about, it is on the extension. So we actually enable extensions for it. And this was the name which you deployed using a AZ CLI command, AZ K8s extension. And that created this extension and deployed those pods in the backend. So that was the first step. Second step, as we spoke about, we create a custom location. So you can see there's a custom location created called as reactor meetup location. This is the new type of resource which you will see. This custom location is nothing but it is an extension of Azure location construct. So I'll in my upcoming demo, I'll show you how you'll use it, right? So when you create a logic app, when you create a function, a web app, this is what will be a differentiator. You'll be specifying this to tell Kubernetes APIs that, okay, not the Kubernetes API, sorry, the Azure RM API. I don't want it to be natively deployed on Azure. I actually want it deployed on my Azure Arc enabled cluster. And the third one, which we spoke about, actually, the last step is to creating an Arc app service kube environment. So I have all this setup in place. I have deployed everything. And now what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you the experience, right? So I'm on Azure Arc, and I quickly want to show you the experience, how it looks like, right? I want to create a logic app. How will be my portal experience, right? So I'm on my subscription, and then I just go to my resource group. I give it a beautiful name. Okay, and then what I need to do is I just need to change the publishing method. So this is a standard normal logic app creation process, which I created. I just have to select a Docker container option here. And as soon as you do that, it automatically shows the custom locations, which is part of your this subscription. And you can select that. And then you can go to the standard things like a storage account you need or not. And the second point, which I want to touch base is, again, though this is your Kubernetes environment, right? So this is like running on AWS or running on-prem or running on other OpenShift clusters, right? Those on top of that cluster, you are deploying logic app, right? And or web app, and still you are able to leverage native services of Azure like application insights. So you have that capabilities. Okay, I want to enable application insights as well for my web app. So you can do that as well. And then you can go ahead and click on review and create. And this will go ahead and create your logic app. And to show you how, how does it look like? It's pretty same. If you work on the logic app deployment, it's standard. The logic app standard looks the same. The only differentiator, as I spoke about earlier, is this piece. You can see a custom location, and it has this custom location called as Reactor Meetup location. Okay. Now I'll quickly jump back to our demo, and I quickly want to show you. So we are happy with logic app. Okay, I'm happy I can deploy a logic app on portal. I'm happy with this. But as a developer, I'm doing some Node.js app web application development, and I want to deploy that, right? So I want to deploy a web app, and then I want to deploy a web app, actual web app on it, right? So the first step for me would be actually deploying a plan, right? So if you see a plan creation command, right? So if you compare it with a standard AZ CLI command to create plan, right? It is similar. So the similar command, the only differentiator is you are also adding a value called as custom location. You're saying, okay, also deploy everything, deploy in this resource group, deploy in this service plan name, the scaling and other parameters. But the key thing is deploy this particular custom location, which we have already created. So my plan is created. Before I show you on the portal, I'll go ahead and initiate it for the web app as well. Again, web app similar to the normal native experience. The key differentiator is this parameter value that I want to deploy it in a custom location. And if I want to go back and show you the experience on the portal and see how it looks like, let's see the plan is deployed. And if you see same experience, and we can see it is deployed into a custom location called as a Reactor Meetup location. And if I go to apps, and hopefully apps is deployed by now. Let's see. Okay, apps is deployed. Should be able to see it. Okay, yeah, here it is. So this is my web app, and which I just quickly deployed, and I'm able to browse it, right? So this is my web app, and as you can see, how we know this is not running on Azure native Azure. I'll show you a backend scenario as well, how I can say it's not running on a native Azure. The two key things. First key thing is obviously the custom location. As you can see that it is again pointing to that value called as custom location. It is running on the Reactor Meetup location, and I'm still able to natively browse to it and see. And the last part which I want to quickly show you guys is the developer experience, right? I have a sample code which I want to deploy and see how the behavior would be, right? So I have a package which I'm deploying using my AZ command. I'll do that, and I'll quickly put it on refresh to see the behavior, how quickly the deployment happens, and once it is completed, are we able to see the change happening or not? There it is. So our deployment completed, and our custom code, which is for the application, is deployed, and it is up and running here. So that's the whole journey. So that covers the whole journey about what we wanted to cover in terms of how you can run your favorite Azure services, starting from Kubernetes onboarding to GitOps scenario, to getting into some extensions, and then eventually getting your API management, Azure functions, logic apps, and web apps run on the Azure Arc enabled cluster. So I guess we are on time. And anything else which you wanted to add, Arvind or Aditya? Otherwise, floor is open for Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. So yeah, like that told, if you guys have any questions, so based on whatever we have covered, I just want to understand what are some of the things which look interesting for you, which you want to try out, or based on your experience, have you looked at Azure Arc before? Just want to understand, or if you have any questions to ask, just a time to ask that.
You can unmute and ask questions if you have any.
I have one question. Let's say as we have connecting into the another cluster, right? We have the Kubernetes cluster on Amazon, right? And we are connected to that from the Microsoft Azure. Let's say something application is get crashed or the container or the pod is crashed. So do we need to check it on the Amazon, right? Not on the, or do we get kinds of notification from there?
That's
On the
a real good question, and I'll take back the cue. Arvind, sorry for taking over. I'll just quickly want to show. So it's an interesting question, and let me see if I still have it. I'll show you quickly. So going back to our cluster, right? So if you see here, one of the pieces which I showed in the demo, right, when we were going through this slide, that advantage of doing this optional scenario, right, the optional one, where we said that you can also deploy log analytics workspace. So the advantage of integrating log analytics workspace is you get all the native capabilities of monitoring in place, right? And how do we enable it? As I spoke about earlier, is we enable it using the extensions again. So we use extension for app services. Similarly, we're using extension called as Azure Monitor, which you are deploying on top. Is if I quickly go back and click on Insight. So if you have seen any of the any Azure native application, right? Any native Azure resources, you can see that we have this Insights, right? But now I'm going on an Insights tab for a Azure Arc enabled cluster, which is for a AWS cluster or any other cluster for that matter. So what I want to quickly show you is, if this happens in time, that you can see whatever was your question, right? You can see the status or different nodes, different pods, controllers, and everything, right? If you can see here, you're getting all the node utilization reports for the different nodes we have. Information about those nodes, if they're healthy, what kind of utilization it have. And then the last part, the containers, right? So you have all this data ingested into log analytics, and you can use the native log analytics capabilities and write queries, alerts, monitoring, and everything, right? Traditionally, how we do in Azure. And then we can meet your requirement, what you spoke about now. That's how we would do it. I hope I answered your question.
yes, yes, thanks. Yeah. So everything will get means we need to check on the Azure portal itself.
Correct. So the whole idea is that giving you that single pane of glass, you don't jump around, go to AWS, go to GKE, go to on-prem. We don't want you to do that. We want to get as much as possible everything on a single place, and so that you can go and review it from a single place, everything, and manage it.
Yeah, that is very good thing then. Yeah. So we just need to connect and everything will be monitored from our Azure portal itself. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thank you.
So just one other important resource which I thought I would share. This is the Azure Arc Jumpstart. So I mean, whatever we have demoed here, if you want to try out these scenarios, right? There are around 40 plus scenarios on this created by Microsoft. So you have all these scenarios if you want to deploy Kubernetes cluster, data services, app services by leveraging Azure Arc. So all of these scenarios you have in-depth demo scenarios and also to try out all this. So I'll paste the link in chat if you guys want to look at this, and welcome to try that out and look at Azure Arc and explore some of the capabilities. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I think it's over to you, Rashmita.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zaid and Arvind, for this amazing session, and thank you all for joining us today. Please feel free to do event check-in and share your feedback about today's session. It will help us to choose our topics better. Also, please visit our Microsoft Bengaluru meetup page for more upcoming session. Thank you all once again and enjoy the rest of your day.